Patience during this virtual meeting. Multiple staff members are behind the scenes to make sure that the meeting runs smoothly and all applicants and citizens are able to communicate with the commission at the appropriate times. During the meeting, you will see live images or still images of DDRC members and staff. However, images of the applicant and public will not be visible.
Public will also be able to participate via three methods. When participating, please provide your name for documentation purposes. So you may participate by watching, emailing, phoning, or logging into the web session. If you choose to watch, you can stream the meeting through City TV at www.youtube.com/user/Columbia-SC-Government. If you're emailing, you can submit a statement to cocboardmeeting@columbiasc.gov leading up to and or during the meeting as we're monitoring this account throughout the proceedings. We'll read anything that we receive into the record. If you're phoning, you may call 855-925-2801. When prompted, please enter the meeting code 8638. So if you're calling in by phone, you'll have three options. If you hit *1, it will allow you to listen. If you hit *2, it will allow you to record a voicemail that we'll read into the record. If you hit *3, you'll be placed in a queue so that you can speak live when prompted. So please make sure your computer audio is muted if you're calling in live via your phone so we don't get feedback. You can stream via the web at publicinput.com/COC-DDRC-December. And we'll call the roll. Mr. Baker?
Present.
Mr. Broom?
Here.
Mr. Dinkins?
Here.
Ms. Fuller-Wilt?
Here.
Ms. Jaco?
Here.
Ms. Johnson?
Here.
Mr. Salibi?
Here.
Mr. Savory?
Here.
And Mr. Wolf. We have quorum.
Thank you. In order to avoid ex parte communications, DDRC members are under strict instructions not to discuss cases under consideration with the public or with each other outside of the public forum. The meeting typically starts with staff calling the case, giving a summary of the project, and then calling on the applicant to present if they wish. Decisions are typically made in one evening. Decisions may be appealed within 30 days to a court of competent jurisdiction. Oaths will be administered individually as we hear either from applicants or from live speakers. Applicants with requests before the DDRC are allotted a presentation time of 10 minutes. This time should include, but is not limited to, an overview of the project, case history, and any pertinent meetings held regarding the request. This time also includes all persons presenting information on behalf of the applicant, such as attorneys, engineers, and architects. This time limit does not include any questions asked by the DDRC or staff regarding requests. Members of the general public are given the opportunity to address their concerns in intervals of 2 minutes. Applicants may have 5 minutes to respond. Staff has a timer and will make presenters aware of when their time has expired. Are there any changes to the agenda?
There are several changes to the agenda. Let's see. Under our regular agenda, item number 2 under urban design, which is 1401 through 1431 Assembly Street. Oops, I'm sorry, 1 second. There we go. And 1011 through 1019 Washington Street. It's part of the same project. This is a request for a certificate of design approval for changes to an approved design in the City Center Design Development District has been deferred. And under the historic portion of the agenda, all cases have actually either been withdrawn or deferred, but I'll read those out. 2531 Gervais Street, a request for preliminary certification for the Bailey Bill for an individual landmark has been deferred, as has 127 Waccamaw Avenue, a request for a certificate of design approval for new construction in Wales Garden Architectural Conservation District. On a vacant lot adjacent to 2219 Rembert Street, a request for a certificate of design approval for new construction and site improvements in Elmwood Park Architectural Conservation District has been deferred. Likewise, 1001 Senate Street, a request for design approval for exterior changes for a National Register structure, as well as one holding the Bailey Bill, has been deferred. And 1644 Main Street, a request for design approval for signage and appeal to a staff decision for an individual landmark Bailey Bill structure has been withdrawn.
Thank you. The DDRC uses the consent agenda to approve non-controversial or routine matters by a single motion and vote. If a member of the DDRC or the general public discusses an item on the consent agenda, that item is removed from the consent agenda and considered during the meeting. The DDRC then approves the remaining consent agenda items. Will staff please read the consent agenda?
Certainly. The first item is under the historic portion of the agenda, 1625 Hayward Street. This is a request for design approval for new construction of an accessory structure in the Wales Garden Architectural Conservation District. 2215 Senate Street, request for design approval for exterior changes, as well as preliminary certification for the Bailey Bill in the Old Shandon Lower Waverly Protection Area, Area A. And last is 1811 Gervais Street, a request for design approval for exterior changes and preliminary certification for the Bailey Bill for an individual landmark.
Is there anyone from DDRC that would like any item removed from the consent agenda? Is there anyone from the public that would like to have an item removed from the consent agenda? Please communicate by sending an email to cocboardmeeting@columbiasc.gov. Please communicate via phone by pressing *2 to leave a voice message or *3 to speak in person. We will pause to allow communication from the public.
Mr. Chair, at this time, I do not have any callers on the line.
Thank you.
We do not have any email.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a motion and a second? Nope. Do I have a motion and second to accept the consent agenda subject to all conditions contained in the case summaries as well as the November meeting minutes?
Mr. Chairman, I move to accept the consent agenda with all conditions as well as the November minutes.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Could we have a vote, please?
Mr. Baker,
Approve.
Mr. Broom,
Yes.
Mr. Dinkins,
Yes.
Ms. Fuller-Wilt,
Yes.
Ms. Jaco,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Salibi,
Yes.
thank you, Mr. Savory,
Yes.
and Mr. Wolf.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes.
Thank you. And our first and I think only case, please.
Okay, so the first case this evening is 1509 to 1517 Gervais Street and 1212 Bull Street. This is a request for certificate of design approval for renovations in the City Center Design Development District. The proposal is for the renovation of an existing office building, the upfit of an existing warehouse to a mechanic service station, and the renovation and replacement of the existing front building facade on Gervais Street. The configuration of the original 1509 Gervais building is an interesting mid-century building that was originally a furniture warehouse. The prominent cantilever roof sits atop what was a glass showroom, which has since been sheathed in corrugated metal siding. The roof structure projects far into the right-of-way and will need to be removed. The proposal is to dismantle a majority of the front of the building and rebuild the facade while maintaining some structural components. The 1517 Gervais building, which if you guys are looking at the plan, 1509 is the one closer to the corner of Bull Street, and 1517 is farther to the east. The 1517 building was built in 1949 and according to the applicant's research was a Studebaker auto showroom, but has been heavily modified and bears little evidence of any original features. Part of the building wall also encroaches into the right-of-way on Gervais Street and must be removed. The design team did look into the possibility of restoration of one or both buildings, but found the prospect infeasible and unsuitable for the proposed use. Neither of the buildings are protected from demolition. With the required removal of the roof structure on 1509 and the lack of any significant remaining architectural features on 1517, the facade will be evaluated primarily on the new construction guidelines, as well as consideration of some site planning guidelines. And just as a point of context, the proposed use of auto repair does require a special exception, which was granted by the Board of Zoning Appeals on October 1st. And the project also received a variance to the off-street parking requirement, as well as a variance to the buffer transition yard on October 1st. And the buffer transition yard is between the parking lot that enters from Bull Street and the property to the north. I'm not going to read the whole evaluation, but I will read the portion on setbacks because this is a little bit more of a complex part of the project, and then I'll read the staff recommendation. So the section 5.4.1 setbacks in the design guidelines says, in order to preserve the scale of the pedestrian environment and continue to foster the urban character of city center, the design development district will have no minimum required front yard setback. The maximum setback for any new structure should be the average of the existing setback in the block and adjacent blocks where the project is to be constructed. In situations where the average is not established, the setback will be 10 feet. Although the criteria for setbacks will be the same throughout the city center design development district, some areas of the district have a more urban commercial character and others maintain a residential character. Each project should still be evaluated in context with its surroundings in order to properly decide whether a minimum or maximum setback should be used so that the overall character of the street is preserved. And then the staff comments are that the existing buildings are built slightly over the property line, which is an extremely tight condition for pedestrians on Gervais Street, with a 5-foot sidewalk and a tiny strip of grass against the curb. The proposed configuration puts the building walls in a similar location with only 7 feet between the building face and the curb. For new construction, the recommendation would be to push the front building wall back to the maximum 10-foot setback to create a more comfortable and safe sidewalk that meets the city's engineering standards, which include a 4 to 8 foot planting zone, a 6 to 12 foot sidewalk zone, and a 2 to 10 foot frontage zone along the building for commercial areas. However, since part of the structure of the 1509 building is being utilized for the new facade, this is not possible for 1509. The 2 recessed area on either side of the roll-up door are set back 5 feet from the primary facade, which is the recommended maximum for recessed entries per section 5.7.1. 1517 shows a new wall being built at the property line, which could be built further back to allow a more generous sidewalk space. Putting this office portion of the building facade back 3 feet would provide for a total of 10 feet between the face of the building and the curb, while still continuing the rhythm of recessed and projecting bays. This would also allow for a tree cutout or 2 adjacent to the curb, similar to the trees planted down the street at the Municipal Association building, enhancing the pedestrian realm. While large shade trees cannot be planted under power lines, smaller understory trees would still be an improvement to this frontage, particularly with it being south facing. And staff finds that the proposal meets a number of the city center design guidelines, but needs to make some modifications to substantially comply. Staff recommends approval of the request with the condition that the following items be revised and deferred to staff for approval. To increase the glazing percentages along Gervais Street to at least 50%, to reconfigure the materials of the 2 recessed bays of the 1509 building to all brick, to move the wall of the forward portion of the 1517 building 2 to 3 feet to accommodate a wider sidewalk zone, to increase the depth of brick detailing and pilasters to be more prominent, to work with staff to configure right-of-way improvements to include understory trees, decorative street lighting, and other details, and that all other details be deferred to staff. And John Powell, the architect, is here to present, and I believe he's going to use the drawings that are in the PowerPoint.
Thank you. I'd like to ask just a clarification, make sure I understand the staff before we move on to the applicant. Lucinda, so my understanding from reading your summary is that this automotive repair use would not have been allowed without the Board of Zoning Appeals making a special exception. Is that right? That's correct.
That is
right?
correct. That's correct.
And there's this will be introducing this industrial garage roll-up door. That wasn't part of, I don't think that was necessarily part of zoning, but as part of what the applicant is going to have to work through with DOT in order to introduce a new curb cut in order to access this garage door on Gervais Street, correct?
That's correct. And my understanding is they have got an application in with DOT and have had conversations. And while that process is not complete, they anticipate approval. I think the DOT's position is that they're removing 2 curb cuts, one of which is closer to the intersection. So it was seen as a net gain, I guess, compared to what's there now. That's my understanding of that application, where it stands.
2 curb cuts though, but not actively used for.
Correct.
Haven't been used. Okay, so this would otherwise not have been allowed if it were not for the BOZA special exception.
Correct.
Okay. So somewhat outside of our purview, but I just wanted to make sure I understood that context. Okay, very good, thank you. And is the applicant is here, I think, and wishes to speak?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can.
Great, fantastic.
You can state your, John, excuse me, I need to swear you in. If you state your name and then I'll swear you in.
John Powell, Seed Architecture.
And do you promise to tell the truth in these proceedings?
I do.
Thank you. Go ahead.
First of all, thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to present the project. I believe on the line, Hoyt Burnett is also available, who can answer some of those site-related questions as they come up. Also, I believe on the line would be Jimmy Herlong and his son Gus Herlong, the project applicants technically. I'll be representing them, presenting the project. Mr. Chairman, to answer your question, yes, you're correct. This project would not be allowed without BOZA approval. And some of these details were shown, the renderings largely the same to the Board of Zoning Appeals. And what's different about this project from other auto zone or auto mechanic type shops is the intent to use this in a more urban style. So where you might expect to see a auto shop have a bunch of roll-up doors and all the cars out front, this is going to operate much more like a dealership where cars would come in off of Gervais, be brought all the way in the building, and then serviced from within rather than from without. And so that was one of the discussion points with Board of Zoning Appeals. And as Lucinda mentioned, we currently have 2 curb cuts that face Gervais. They are not actively used except that someone has been parking in the loading dock that is currently facing Gervais Street. So DOT has been part of this discussion. They are on board as far as we can help with consolidating this to a single one-way in turn. And then the traffic for vehicles out back and onto Bull Street. So with that, Lucinda, and that Hoyt provided, just to give an overall context, I'm not sure if it's last or somewhere in the middle, but what was mentioned was that these are, so on the right-hand side is the 1517 building, currently occupied or was occupied several years ago by Balknight Petrus Stormer as a office building. It has EIFS across the facade. It's probably, if you've driven by Gervais, this is the one you may have noticed. We are working to improve upon it, but currently the front portion of the elevation extends about 12 inches over the property line in the right of way. So in order to do this renovation, we have to shave off the front of the building and put something else back. The left-hand building, which is the one where the arrows are kind of pointing up and through, that would be the shop that would be used. That is currently a vacant, all but abandoned warehouse type building. No finishes on the inside. It's as it faces Gervais, there's a metal cladding around what was, by photographs we can tell, a glass box. But the parapet, or rather the soffits, extend out over the right of way. And so again, we have to remove those in order to be on our own property. And so those two challenges, being not on the property being purchased, means we have to do a good bit of work to this. And that good bit of work is really what's triggering the difference between treating this as a renovation project and treating this as a new construction project in terms of the DDRC's guidelines. So there are a great many guidelines that Lucinda has done a great job explaining in text, but those are primarily the new construction guidelines being applied to what is a new facade. Everything else is largely a renovation. So this project went from a renovation to new construction during the review process, and so that's one of the things that we're trying to hash out in terms of meeting the guidelines as best we can while working within an existing building. The hatched area in the back is a parking lot associated with these two parcels, and that would be the way out of the building from a shop standpoint, but also coming and going off Bull Street. You can see the two arrows on the top left indicating vehicular traffic. We have had to change that significantly from what's there now. The parcel is only 59 feet wide, which is too narrow. The parking lot has to be 60 feet wide according to zoning regulations. And so that has been revamped, and some parking are eliminated to meet current zoning guidelines for parking lots. So that's the overall way this L-shaped 3-parcel conglomeration is functioning. Lucinda, if you could skip to some of the renderings, let me try to address the questions about the setbacks, the street frontage, and particular staff recommendations. I hope you've read the pages of work that Lucinda's put into this. It's very helpful, especially to us as we work on the design of the project. It has been recommended this be approved, but with conditions, which is perfectly reasonable. And we've been working to try and meet as many of these as possible in the interim since we received these comments. Increasing the glazing is not difficult. We have already started that process, and we can meet that 50% recommendation. That is not a challenge for us. However, Lucinda, if you'd skip forward, I think it's rendering number 7. There are a bunch of these that are very, very similar. But looking back towards that garage portion, one more, I think. One more still. There we go. So the recessed alcoves there, in order to get that 50% glazing ratio and preserve that roll-up door and glass, the left and right recessed areas need to largely be glass in order to meet that ratio. And the second recommendation is to take what is now a Nishiya stone look panel above, making that into brick. We're certainly happy to do that, but I wanted to point out that by taking the glass left to right within those alcoves and then putting brick above, the brick from the renderings I've done since this was submitted, it does look somewhat heavy, and the glass is wider rather than taller in orientation. And so I would appreciate just giving a little bit of latitude to staff to work with us on exactly how we achieve that 50% ratio. Glad to do it, but would prefer to have some flexibility in the design if approved. Skipping down to the questions about moving the front wall back 2 to 3 feet to accommodate a wider sidewalk zone. Again, Lucinda mentioned that we have to shave off the front of this building. What we don't know yet is how much structure we're going to have to get into in order to make that happen. The original building, we can tell from a old photograph and some background information, thanks to Historic Columbia, was that right-hand building, the 1517 building, was once a Studebaker showroom. The curve that is now in EFUS was part of the curved design of the Studebaker dealership, but we don't know exactly how it was structured behind that original facade. And so again, I would ask for a little bit of latitude as to how we achieve that. If there's a beam that's 18 feet back, or excuse me, 18 inches back, and that's the obvious place to try and take the building back to, I'd appreciate staff having the ability to prove that without coming back through DDRC. Moving the building back 2 or 3 feet is relatively inconsequential, except for that structural aspect of it. And we'd rather work with existing materials as much as possible rather than truly starting over from a structural standpoint. The recommendation about increasing brick detail, we've already worked on that. That is no trouble. The pilasters, I'm going to set out a full bed depth. So those will certainly be more pronounced in the final version. And then the last one before that, the details defer to staff comment. Work with staff to configure right-of-way improvements to include understory trees, decorative streetlights, and other details. And this is where I may ask Hoyt to weigh in if he's on the line. As you know, working in the public right-of-way is somewhat challenging. There are power lines that don't show up in the renderings, of course, that are above that sidewalk. There are currently parking spaces along Gervais Street on that side. Some of these things would be great, I think, from a safety standpoint and from turning into this building. Getting rid of those parking spaces would be an advantage to the project, but we don't have control over that. And so, again, in working with staff, I would just ask your latitude in how we achieve that. For example, the street lighting and the trees, if we plant trees that grow up too tall, Dominion's just going to shave the top of them off. We'd rather be able to design that in a way that meets the desires of the various parties without backing ourselves into a corner with whatever motion is made that requires us to put something there. So again, glad to work with staff and make this a quality project. The rendering is not intended to be perfectly accurate on the site development standpoint. It's more intended to show the concept of the architecture. But I would ask that staff not be bound to meeting a motion that, say, parking services will not allow, or if Dominion will not allow us to put in certain things, I'd appreciate not needing to come back through DDRC to gain your approval also. Last point on the staff recommendation that all details defer to staff. We're very comfortable working with the staff. It's been a privilege over the years to work with that team, and certainly glad to do so. With that, if Hoyt is on the line, if he'd like to speak to any of this, I'd welcome that input. Otherwise, I may turn it back over to you guys for questions.
Yeah, John, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
With the road side, both the road and the sidewalk being DOT owned, to add lights and trees would take a fair amount of coordination with DOT, with the city, who's going to maintain them, who's going to pay the light bill, those kinds of things. So that would be something that we would prefer to work with staff as far as what's feasible and what's not feasible from a maintenance standpoint as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hoyt.
That it?
Believe so. Obviously glad to answer questions or clarify anything that I may have skipped over.
Thank you. So, yeah, at this point, if commissioners have any questions for the applicant about the application, I'd like to move to any public input if there is, and then circle back for the discussion. But if you have any questions specifically about the application at this point, please go ahead and ask. Okay. Hearing none, let's move to public comment, and then we can circle back to our discussion as usual. We encourage those that would like to communicate via email to begin sending in letters and emails. Emails are to cocmeeting@columbiasc.gov or on the web at publicinput.com/COC-DDRC-December. For those wanting to leave a voicemail or speak live, call 855-925-2801. When prompted, please enter the meeting code 8638. and press star 2 to begin leaving the voice message. If you would like to speak live, press star 3, and please be sure to keep your computer audio off to avoid feedback. We will now hear comments that have been received in writing.
We do not have any emails right now.
Okay. And any voicemails received, as well as from those calling in live.
I do not have anyone on the line right now.
Okay, very good. Have we received any new correspondence, or are there any new callers in the queue to speak?
I do not appear to have anyone that has joined.
Okay. We can skip this one then. And so now we're at follow-up questions or discussion about the application. I have some thoughts and some comments, but I'd like to defer to other members of the commission if there are anything that anybody would like to say or to ask the applicant at this point.
Can I ask you a question about the second staff recommendation dealing with the reconfiguration of the bricks? I just wanted to make sure that I understood your position on that. They've recommended that it be reconfigured to all brick. I think you said that there are some additional renderings that we haven't seen that contemplate all brick, but you said that looked heavy. Is that accurate?
Unfortunately, that's in my working process, and I have not submitted those to the DDRC.
Okay.
In taking glass all the way across the bottom, it just creates a sizable masonry element above head. And while, again, not opposed to doing it, we would want to visually support that. And of course, that cuts into our glazing percentage in terms of how that massing works. And so if we're bound to meeting the letter of the law in motion, we would just ask that the staff have a little bit of latitude to work with us on that.
Okay. And so I think you just touched on the fact that if you have to reconfigure the brick, that will cut into some of the percentages, but you indicated that you're okay with it being at least 50% as they've recommended. Is that correct?
Yes, certainly. In fact, the design, again, haven't submitted to the DDRC just due to the time constraints of having sent the packet out. But yes, we've already reconfigured some of the windows in order to meet that 50% mark.
Okay. And the setbacks you talked about kind of extensively. So I just want to make sure that I understand your position on this before Tom and anyone else makes any more comments on it. You're fine with the DOT but you prefer not to come back to the commission, and you just want the staff to have more latitude to work with you on that, subject to any DOT recommendations and regulations that we might not be aware of. Is that true?
Yes, I think the challenge is because we don't have authority over that space, we can't necessarily meet a guideline or staff recommendation if DOT or Dominion or one of the other agencies won't let us do that. We would like to have the opportunity to work with staff to meet as many of those things as we can within our own ability.
Okay. And the brick detailing and all of the other items that were discussed in terms of increasing the depth of it, you were fine with that too, correct?
Yes, certainly.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to make sure that I knew exactly what you were requesting before we moved on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. Anything else?
What, I mean, can a motion be made conditional upon DOT approval? I mean, obviously you'll have to have it, but this location is, to me, somewhat congested, and I understand the DOT process can take some time, but the existing curb cuts really, I mean, I think the traffic to me is a concern, and the city not being involved really through that process. Not knowing where, and maybe John or Hoyt, y'all could fill me in on where you are in that process. I know it's a little out of our purview, but I think we are reviewing site plan and, you know, just changes in traffic patterns.
Certainly. Can I get you to Hoyt to answer that?
Sure.
Absolutely.
So we've had discussions with Tyler Clark at SCDOT about you know, taking out the old driveways and putting in the new driveway for the bay. We've submitted the DOT permit. They did request that we remove some of the parallel parking spaces so that we would have a kind of a queue, so to speak, to get into the building, so it wouldn't back up traffic along Gervais Street. So that was one of the important things. So, and I think we'll probably end up eliminating all of the parallel spaces out front there. All of the parallel spaces are in front of our property. And so I think that'll probably be what is ultimately decided upon from DOT.
Okay. So at the end of the day, I mean, again, I think that you have Tyler on board and DOT and are in constant contact with them. So
Yes, we are.
I think that makes me comfortable. I mean, and any improvements in the right of way too, sidewalks or any other?
Yes, we'll have to replace the sidewalk in order to ramp up into the garage area. And so I think actually almost all of the curb and gutter and sidewalk along our frontage is going to be removed and replaced in order to meet the new current DOT standard for cross slope, for ADA and all that kind of stuff.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else have anything they'd like to say or ask? Well, let me make a few comments. And I think, Sam, for your questions or concerns about coordination between the city and DOT and the overhead power lines and all of that complexity is a good question, a valid question. I think, and Lucinda touched on that briefly in her earlier staff presentation. I think some of what's happening with this is probably a little not that fortunate. I think having a industrial garage door on Gervais Street on such a busy thoroughfare is probably not the best solution that we would like to see along in the core of the city center along the Gervais Street corridor. As you know, John, as a former DDRC commissioner, we have no purview over use, and that use has been granted. I feel as though it would be very, very important to follow the staff recommendation, setting back the 1517 piece, I would say to 3 feet, but I would also strongly recommend doing the same thing at the projected piece at 1509. I've done plenty of renovations. You will be doing overwhelmingly, no matter what you do with those 2 pieces, shaving off the fronts, still overwhelmingly be renovating, the balance of the building. But I think setting those 2 pieces back 3 feet so that you get the 10-foot rather than the 7-foot dimension, I think would be critical, because I don't think that, and I'd like to defer to Lucinda on this, but I don't think that there's really enough planning room. I think it looks like you got about 2 feet between the curb and the sidewalk to plant trees. It seems clear to me that if there are, understory trees, trees like crepe myrtles, I suppose, I'm not an arborist, but that there is clearly a solution to be able to plant and avoid the overhead lines, and for the city's forestry and beautification folks to work with DOT. I'm sure that there are solutions that they can arrive at, and a motion that we would make would defer to staff, and that's the reason for it. But I don't think that there's a real chance to plan anything meaningful if those facades are not set back 3 feet from where they currently are. And I think it would also significantly increase the safety factor. especially you have cars pulling off Gervais Street and turning into the building, crossing the sidewalk. You know, I walk over there from time to time. Our CPA actually was Boak Night, so I would go over there to drop off packages, and that is a baking hot corridor along there. And your renderings show a lot of shade, but I think that's about you know, at 8 o'clock at night on an August night. But there wouldn't be any shade along that corridor. So I think from a safety standpoint, from a sort of streetscape and pedestrian experience standpoint, that increasing that, pulling back those facades 3 feet, both of those two facades. I mean, the other two that you recessed, those are new facades anyway, so there's very little that you're actually saving. To me, pulling those back, both of them back 3 feet would be an enormous improvement and provide at least a fighting opportunity to plant trees, understory trees along that corridor, which I think would be very important. So, you know, I think that's where I am on that, along with the other staff recommendations. I don't know if other commissioners have any thoughts about that.
So Tom, are you mainly speaking to with the backing up the building 3 feet, really just from a ease of access standpoint, or are you more concerned about the trees and the landscaping? Because it just seems to me that, you know, the landscaping can certainly be in our purview, but not really the access into the property. If Tyler Clark and DOT is, you know,
I'm talking about providing the opportunity to actually landscape and to be able to plant trees.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we also have to grant site plan approval for this project, I believe. It's all lumped together.
Actually, so this project.
Is that right? I was
well,
going to ask that.
So the project doesn't actually meet the threshold to go through site plan approval, like through the DDRC or through the Planning Commission. The same staff reviewing agencies will be looking at the project. And really, because, you know, again, this is kind of skating a strange line between new construction and renovations. I mean, if it were considered a new construction, the building wall would need to be placed in a location that allows for meeting the city's engineering requirements, which include a minimum of a 6-foot clear sidewalk zone and a recommendation for a planting zone between the sidewalk and the curb. After the city adopted Walk by Columbia, those standards were adopted into the city's engineering standards. So these aren't just, you know, warm and fuzzy recommendations on their real dimensions that are laid out in the city's engineering standards. And we work with all the time in requiring right-of-way improvements that have to be approved by DOT. So we're familiar.
I
with
guess
that.
I just question our purview of the site plan review at all. I mean, I'm not really sure I see a site plan application.
Well, the DDRC, it doesn't have to be an official site plan review for the DDRC to look at the site, because site planning guidelines are part of the DDRC's purview. They're in the guidelines in terms of, they talk about the pedestrian realm, you know, the sidewalk zone. I mean, these are all part of the design of the property as well.
Listen, is that,
Well,
I may have
just
missed.
pardon my ignorance, but I mean, from the past, when we've had separate projects that, you know, we get a site plan approval and a certificate of design approval, how is this different?
Well, that's a great question. It's a good question. The difference is the actual process of site plan approval is basically an administrative review that's done, you know, typically by the Planning Commission, but sometimes by DDRC when a project meets a certain threshold, which is like 100,000 square feet or 3 or more residential units. So all kinds of sizes of residential projects and large scale commercial projects have to go through what's called site plan review. But it doesn't mean that those site planning issues are not reviewed. You know what I mean? When the project doesn't meet that threshold, it's still part of the review of the property.
But does this particular building, does it hit that threshold? I mean, it seems to me that it's not within those parameters of what you just laid out. So I'm just
right. The city center design guidelines, that we have to use to make a certificate of design approval, I mean, also include site improvement guidelines. So it doesn't have to be a threshold in order for the site to be looked at as part of the development proposal. This is part of the design review, is what I'm saying.
Right.
I guess it just needs to be, considered as a whole, considering the DOT has ownership of the road and the city has, certainly invested, a lot of money in Gervais Street, and the developer does too. And I think that I'll put my trust in the DOT as well as the city with respect to the curb cuts.
And Lucid, again, you said it's not required, although it can be kind of considered as part of this holistic review we do. But I think, and maybe this is a question for Mr. Powell, you said you'd be okay with setting back the building a little further, depending on, or I guess pending not finding any kind of load-bearing structure that prohibits that. Is that right?
Well, we're actually talking about two different buildings. So let me clarify. The 1517 building is 12 inches over the setback currently. What I don't know, because we don't own the building yet and we can't do enough demo to figure it out, is exactly where the structural system is. And so I would like some latitude on that building to work with staff to figure out what makes sense. This is still a renovation project. We're reviewing it as if it's a brand new building, but if it was a brand new building, it would still be very, very different. On the other building, I lose track of which one we're talking about, 1507, 1509, the shop building, the projected area where the drive-in, that is an existing structure. We can see it, wide flanges holding up the structure, the columns at the corners. We know exactly where that is. This building is designed to encapsulate the corner of the existing columns within the metal stud frame. And so that is exactly where that building would go unless we tear out those columns, replace the beam on the outside edge, put new columns in, put a new beam in, brand new facade, everything. So while I tend to agree from a traffic flow standpoint, now DOT is reviewing this also, but from a renovation standpoint, it is a good bit more difficult. And from a scale of project, it is asking sort of another step to demo, not just the first 2 feet, but really a good chunk of that in order to put back a new wall there. So they are different in the way we're treating them. I hear you, and I'm glad to work with staff on it, but that's the reason for the difference is we know where the structure is on one of them. We're still uncertain on the BPS building, exactly how that's supported.
Well, I would like to, as a practice myself, as a practicing architect myself who's done many, many, many renovations, I would like to interject to put this a little bit in perspective. What we would be talking about is not asking the applicant to completely restructure the project. What I was referring to, staff has already made a recommendation to push back the 1517 projection 2 to 3 feet. What I am simply proposing is that the same thing would be done at 1509. I understand there's existing structure there, but cutting off a couple of beams and putting up new steel posts 3 feet back is not structural gymnastics. It's doable. So I just would like to add that perspective. If this commission doesn't think that if the commissioners don't agree that that should be done, then that's one thing. But I think we need to be clear that that could be done, and it's in the big picture of renovating these buildings, it's not an overwhelming driver. I think we need to understand that. Whether or not the commission decides that it should be done is a different question. But what I'm suggesting is that I don't believe that there's going to be much up, and I'd like staff to weigh in on this. I don't believe there's really going to be realistic opportunity, for instance, to plant understory trees to get any kind of shade or any kind of buffer between the pedestrian experience and the street if those two projecting facades aren't pulled back in order to accommodate that. So maybe the other commissioners don't agree that that's important enough to ask the applicant to do do that, but that's all I'm suggesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of, well, Chairman, let me just say, I mean, I would echo that. And I would say that, you know, I think we have rare opportunities to improve the safety of the pedestrians. And I think this is one of them. And this is a very busy street. And I don't see, based on, you know, the architectural limited knowledge I have, why that can't be accommodated. And it would, you know, allow for plantings and site visibility that's not there now. I mean, you know, I've fought this for many years, and it's dangerous. And then it leaves an empty void space that never gets landscaped. Now I understand there's an ownership question of who's going to maintain that, and that has to be worked out. But I think DOT would be. I can't imagine they wouldn't be unhappy to hear this.
Well, I understand both Sanford and Tom's, both your points there. I mean, I think there's another way to look at it from pushing back the building, and, you know, anything is feasible, you know, from an architectural standpoint. But the flip side of that is there's certainly cost associated to an owner, developer, you know, renovation for building. So we can certainly look at it from that point of view as well. And so I'm sure John and his team has exercised that path to say, all right, what is the most cost efficient way to rehab this portion of the building? And, you know, that's certainly maybe what they presented here today. So I think that's something that we got to think about as well when coming up with possible solutions. You know, to the landscaping point, I mean, they have provided a green space. It appears right in the front of the building, just not along these two that are in question right now, or I guess, or the one that's in the middle that's in question. But I mean, it's sort of a precedent to me that's somewhat set along Gervais Street as you venture down towards Main. I mean, there's not a whole lot of green space in front of every building. So it appears to me they've made an attempt to bring that element into the project. It just that it doesn't cover it in its entirety. So you know, I encourage the entire DDR team to kind of look at similar buildings that are along this stretch, and, you know, how they've landscaped as well, just to see how we can fit in with what's shown along the street.
May I ask staff a question? If one were to make a motion to approve or disapprove, would it be to make a motion to approve for design approval and site plan approval, or just the design approval?
Today, what's on the table is a certificate of design approval.
Okay.
I'll just reiterate that within that, there are aspects of design approval that include site improvement. And also, let me just add too, just because it seems like there's some confusion about the encroachment process. Whenever improvements are made in a SCDOT right-of-way, it does have to go through, obviously, the SCDOT for approval. However, the city also has an encroachment process that will have to be gone through. The reason is street trees are maintained by the city, all in DOT right-of-way. Decorative street lighting is maintained by the city in DOT right-of-way. So the city and the city forestry and beautification and public works and all those folks are also going to be looking at this in terms of an encroachment process. So this is something we do all the time. You know, the city and DOT work together on making sure that it meets everybody's requirements. But the trees, I mean, we're not asking the DOT to maintain the trees. Of course, they'll have to approve that, but this is definitely a joint jurisdictional process. And
Okay.
those recommendations is certainly within the DDRC's purview for urban design.
Yeah, and I mean, I trust the city, and I just feel like there's some gap here that always seems to get missed, and I feel like an opportunity I don't want to lose. But you know, we believe in you guys in partnership with DOT. It's a tough location.
Any other comments? Thoughts by commission members?
I mean, do other commission, I mean, may I ask Tom or Chairman if we have any other comments on the setback on 1509? From other commission members, or?
Well, I mean, I think that the question in my mind is simply that I don't believe that there's enough, as it stands, enough planting width to plant anything of any substance. I think it's about 2 feet. But pulling back 15, 17 as staff has recommended, I think the building design would actually be improved if both of those projections at 1509 and 1517, for one thing, were to match, but also to be pulled back 3 feet. So there was a chance of getting a planting zone out there where trees could actually be planted. I think it would enhance the pedestrian experience. I think it would enhance the building for both of those setbacks to be the same. And it is within our purview. And it's the only opportunity to make that request.
Well, and I think you and I are in agreement. I'm not sure that, I mean, this can be done by a motion with
we can make a motion.
Conditions.
We can make a motion with these conditions deferred to staff.
Well, I think, one question I think that is going through my head is, are we comfortable as a commission deferring all this to staff, or do we feel we need to see a revised concept to feel comfortable? And that's what I'm hearing too many. I'm hearing a lot of different things personally that makes me think, I'm not sure if we're comfortable deferring all this to staff yet without seeing a little bit more. That's my thought.
I'll echo that. Now, maybe not architectural. I mean, maybe I don't have a good handle on architecture, but to me, it seems like there's a lot of changes that have to be made.
Well, that's
I'll speak up in my mind. I don't have a problem following the staff recommendations, especially since Mr. Powell is so willing to work with them on, I guess if we were to defer some of these issues to them, he's willing to meet with us on the glazing, which staff recommended. Staff didn't recommend the setback for 1517. And, I guess one of the benefits of having these meetings virtually is I've got Google Maps. You pulled up right here. The adjacent property, which is closer to Full Street, also has I guess we'll call it a lack of setback issue. So, either you're conforming to the portion of the building we are recommending the setback on 1517, or we're, conforming to the building on the other side of it. So, I guess damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. I guess, can we kick it back to Lucinda to ask, why recommend the setback for 1509 and not 1517? I'm sorry, 1517 and not 1509.
I mean, really, it was just an attempt. I was trying to understand what they were trying to salvage versus not salvage. I was kind of on the fence because, it was an attempt to try to work with what they were trying to salvage about the 1509 building. I mean, I'm not as familiar with the structural aspects of the building and all that stuff. So, I mean, I certainly think that if it could be done, that would be a better situation. I think that, having a more consistent setback and a more consistent planning zone would be, better. And I think it's also John Powell and I have talked a good bit, especially in the last few days about this. And it is a little bit of a weird situation. I mean, like I said, if this were new construction, we would have absolutely required that. So, we are kind of looking at it from a new construction standpoint in terms of if we were to look at this per the renovation guidelines, it wouldn't be meeting any of those because that's all about, preservation of features and materials and things like that. So, I mean, I certainly think the commission has the purview to make that requirement if it seems like a reasonable thing. I think it would create a better pedestrian zone.
If I can, may I step in briefly? I'm not sure if we're still in the question and answer portion of this, so stop me if I'm.
Please go ahead.
To Lucinda's point about this being a renovation and the hybrid nature of it, the reason the facade is being renovated is because it is over the property line. It is, in order to use the building, it has to be taken apart this way. And I can understand the need to and desire to push this back within that purview, but it's still a renovation. And while I understand that cost is not really the realm of the DDRC, there is a point at which we're taking an existing building and we're building an entirely new facade on it. And generally speaking, there's a balance to the way projects are done, in which there's a certain amount of resources that can be put into the public right of way. There's a certain amount of resources that can be put into the front facade. If all of those resources are used up before we renovate the building, it's not a project. And so while I certainly want to meet as many of the requirements as we can, in a renovation, there's simply not the economics of scale to make everything possible. And so I have really appreciated Lucinda's input on this and her careful evaluation of how we're trying to do as much as we can while still keeping the project on track. So just wanted to put that out there. There is a sense in which if we were building this brand new, it'd be a 3-story building, but we are renovating a project. And that's what I just wanted to stress.
You are, however, replacing all of the facades, and you are, the recessed pieces are not, they're all completely new addition, right?
Yes, they are.
Everything around it is removed and replaced.
Commissioner, I mean, personally, I commend your effort in this location, and I'm a little torn, I'll be honest with you, but I think that I'm not really seeing, this is just me personally, our purview or my own, opinion in telling you to set back the building. I'd like to see it that way. But I think if you make the DOT satisfied and protect the safety and welfare of the people, and the doors are not, I think that, again, I'd like to see it that way, but I'm just not sure that I can put that in a motion if I so choose to.
Specifically, what are you referring to, Sanford?
Just setting back the 1509 building.
You're saying that you don't think it's within our purview to?
I'm just not sure if I can. I mean, mandate that. I mean, I'd love to see that. I really think that belongs. And I'm trying to find justification. I wish it was a separate site plan review.
Now, Lucinda, you did say there are at least 2 other entities, governmental bodies, looking at the encroachment.
Correct. Yeah,
So, I mean, the buck doesn't stop with us. We could just, Mr. Powell have to jump through this hoop over and over again, then he'll still have to go to other bodies. We could look at the design, grant it with most of staff's recommendations. And if there's something unsafe about the encroachment, then I'm sure that will be taken care of in one of the next 2 reviews. Right. And that's more clearly within those bodies' purview, right? DOT and sorry, Lucinda, what other city?
Well, the city of Columbia has an encroachment process, which, both of those entities would look at anything that's done in the right of way. I mean, the location of the building wall and how that's built is squarely in the purview of the DDRC. So.
Yeah, I'll speak to that. I mean, I don't think that we don't have another chance to, that if you're granted an approval right now, I think the building facade is where it is. And we've lost any opportunity to increase the width or visibility. And I'd like to see that.
Yeah, and
so
and I would add to Andrew's comments there that let's not get it confused that this is not a site plan review. This is purely on the outside the building and what they've submitted today. It'll be within DOT and the City of Columbia's jurisdiction to grant the access, and if they say that back for whatever reason they provide. Then so be it. That's not the decision we're here to make today.
For what it's worth, we've discussed this kind of extensively. My personal opinion is I'm fine. I definitely understand all of Tom's concerns and why he feels that 1509 should be set back 3 feet as well, I'm fine proceeding without the setback and setting back 1517. That's just my position on it.
I think we've talked, we've talked this in circles. I'm sorry, Mr. Baker, did you want to say something?
No, not at this point.
Okay, thought I heard. I guess, Ashley, if you would be willing, perhaps you could make a motion and we'll see where this goes.
Absolutely. All right. Taking into consideration all of the evidence presented, the case summaries, the testimony offered, and the applicable guidelines as outlined in City Center Guidelines sections 5.2, 5.32, 5.33, 5.35, 5.36, 5.41, 5.42, 5.6, 4.4, 5.7, 5.71, 5.72, and 5.102. I move to grant approval for the requested certificate of design approval for renovations for the property covering 1509 to 1517 Gervais Street and 1212 Bull Street with the following conditions. The glazing percentages should be increased along Gervais Street to at least 50% with consultation from city staff. The materials of the 2 recessed bays of 1509 building should be reconfigured to all brick, however, leaving latitude for the applicant to work on the design in consultation with city staff. The wall of the forward portion of the 1517 building should be moved to accommodate a wider sidewalk, moved up 2 to 3 feet as recommended by city staff, and increase the depth of brick detailing and pilasters to be more prominent. The applicant shall work with city staff to reconfigure the right-of-way improvements, including but not limited to the understory trees, decorative lighting, and other details, taking into consideration DOT guidelines, regulations, DOT Dominion guidelines and regulations, and any other governmental authorities with that, and in consideration with city staff, leaving all other details deferred to city staff.
All right. Is there a second? Any further discussion? Hearing none, could we have a vote, please?
Certainly, Mr. Baker,
Yes.
Mr. Broom,
Yes.
Mr. Dinkins,
No.
Ms. Fuller-Wilt,
Yes.
Ms. Jaco,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Salibi,
Yes.
Mr. Savory,
No.
Mr. Wolf.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, John.
Thank you. Appreciate your input.
Do we have any further cases?
There are no further cases. So
Any other business?
only other business is to wish everyone a happy holiday. So
Very good. Okay, then do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Adjourn.
Second?
Second.
Anyone opposed? Hearing none, meeting adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
thank you, everybody.
Night, everyone. Thank you all.
Thanks.